I hear organic's too hard, so we need regenerative to not be tied to organic because it's too hard to go organic. And then I hear on the other hand, well, organic's not hard enough. It doesn't go far enough. So we need regenerative because organic's not enough. And I kind of love that those both ends happen.
1, 2, 3.
Last week, we had on a farmer that didn't love organic and is very pro regenerative practices. If you didn't listen to Zach's conversation, you need to go check it out. This week, we're talking to the CEO of CCOF, which is California Certified Organic Farmers, Kelly Damewood, to give a different perspective of organic farming. The Modern Acre podcast explores the latest in business, investing, technology, and sustainability in agriculture, and we're your hosts, Tyler and Tim Nuss. If you'd like to dig deeper with The Modern Acre, check out our membership community, The Modern Acre Co-op. The Modern Acre podcast is presented by Pinion. The economics of farming are increasingly difficult, and many producers are asking Pinion, the leading food and ag business advisory firm, questions around thin margins and cash flow. Farmers want to know how to calculate the total cost of running the business and determine their farm's true break-even. The answer is twofold. First, calculating beyond the field is critical. Second, ensure you know your true costs. If you're struggling with this, Pinion advisors can perform financial calculations that identify places to cut expenses and ways to optimize your farm business. Learn more at pinionglobal.com or hit the link in our show notes.
Ty, we are back on a polarizing topic this week, talking again about organic agriculture. I'm so torn on this issue. I just go back and forth on it. As a consumer, it really resonates. I think there's a lot of things that organic does well. And just in the conversation with Kelly, probably agree with about 90% of what she's talking about. There's a few things we disagree on, and it's a nuanced issue. So it was a fun conversation to have to kind of dig into it.
Tim, our relationship with organic has definitely been complicated. It's like a complicated girlfriend or something, right? It's hot, it's cold. You mentioned, we see a lot of the value and the credibility of organic on the store shelves. We've seen a lot of the issues and challenges that on the growing side, just in the global food supply of challenges with fraud and not sourcing locally, but sourcing internationally for the lowest cost. So we see the value, we see some challenges. We know farmers personally, Tim, that love organic. We know farmers personally that don't like organic. So we had Zach on last week, and he had some polarizing opinions around organic not being necessarily good for the world. So we wanted to have this conversation back to back to have a varying viewpoint, and someone who's very pro-organic, believes in the mission of organic and what it means for farmers in the world. Kelly is the perfect person to bring on the podcast. She's the CEO of CCOF. She's run her own farm. She has a history and experience in the regulatory space, dealing with organic policy, and she's been with CCOF for several years. So she's kind of seen firsthand what it takes to scale organic, what's working, what's not in the space. So with that, we'll jump into the conversation with Kelly about all things organic.
Top of mind for me right now is the small scale farmers, the mid scale farmers, and their future here, not just in California, but across the United States, and revisiting our regional and local food systems. It's really top of mind for me right now.
I love that. I would love to dig in there even just to start. This is something that Tim and I have had a lot of conversations about recently with the ag census coming out. I think, Tim and I, we grew up, we've always kind of thought of ourselves as a medium-sized farm. And that was probably not informed with any data. That was just kind of growing up. We knew there was a lot of guys bigger than us doing like 10,000 acres, thousands of acres. And we knew there was, smaller farms at, various scales. And so we've kind of always felt of ourselves as medium, small, medium-sized farmer. And then the ag census comes out, and the how they kind of define farms as like, I think the threshold, Tim, was like $1 million in sales in revenue was the threshold for a large farm. And which kind of blew my mind because I think there's this like disconnect within the industry where, $1 million of sales, that's a small business.
Exactly.
That's a small business, but we refer to those businesses as large farms. So it's kind of this strange dynamic that I don't think we've like recognized or communicated within the industry of like a large farm is actually a very small business relatively, because on $1 million of sales, 10 to 20% operating profit, that's not a big business. And I think there's like, it's one of these sliding scales things where we define $1 million as a large farm, but there's farms doing like 10 million, 20 million, 50 million in sales, right? So it's kind of like this with this really interesting curve on that chart. So
absolutely. I just want to jump in. I think I would have to double check my facts, but the definition of small farm for the USDA is still 250,000 or less. And that's, if you think about not just salaries and input costs and equipment, I mean, you're talking about an extremely small business with extremely small profit margins. And so when resources come out for small producers, sometimes those mid-scale producers can get left behind, even though they also have a lot of needs. So I definitely think some of these definitions and perceptions of what is small, what is big, what is mid-scale could use some refining and revision as we're thinking about policy and funding, and how we just think about it. A small farm in California may be thought of as a larger farm in the Northeast, where land holdings are smaller. So a lot of distinctions depending on what farm you're talking about.
Yeah, it definitely seems like the segmentation in that data needs to be like reviewed, because it's been just the same system for however many years they've done the census, and as inflation's happened and farming has changed, it's just not really a good baseline anymore, like looking at that data without higher segmentation. Well, Kelly, there's a ton we want to dig into, but before we jump into that, let's learn a little bit more about you and your background and what led you to CCOF.
So I grew up in the suburbs. I didn't grow up on a farm. I grew up in the suburbs of Dallas, Texas. And I ended up going to school in Portland, Oregon. And I finished school early, and it was 2009. So right in the middle of the recession, not an ideal time to find a job. And one thing led to another, and I ended up working on and then helping to manage a small, very diverse organic farm outside of Portland, Oregon. And I can't even begin to describe how, for the first time in my life, I felt a sense of connection to understand what it takes to grow your food, to be able to harvest it, to eat it, cook with it. Just was a deeply healing experience for me. And it really opened my eyes, and I'm still very passionate about when you're talking about environmental stewardship or making a difference, when we're talking about issues like climate change or water quality, really all comes to a head in agriculture and farming and food. And it's something that impacts us all. So that's really where my passion was born, was working in the soil. But I also knew I couldn't quite cut it as a farmer. I didn't quite have, I think, the science mind for it. And so I went to law school with this vague idea that I wanted to help organic farmers, especially small farmers. And so I went to Vermont Law School, which is a really premier environmental law program. 3 years in environmental law, when you're there to help farmers, was pretty tough, because environmental law is really about stopping bad actors. It's really about creating regulation and challenging regulation. And that's just not what I'm about exactly. What I really wanted to do was help farmers succeed, help the farmers who were doing the right thing have the funding, the regulatory systems to support them. Because I just saw time and time again how organic, small, sustainable, regenerative farmers were getting kind of pushed out of how the system was designed. So after environmental law, I ended up going to Arkansas to get a master's in food and agriculture law. because I wanted a more traditional agricultural background. And that was really another life-changing experience where I really got to hear more from the larger farming sector and more commodity crop production, and just learned a lot about all the different ways that our legal system and political system impacts our ability to grow good food. So then after I finished all my studies, I started looking for a job. And when I had gone to law school, I had thought, gosh, I don't know, maybe one day I could work for an organic certifier. I don't know why they would need a lawyer, but maybe I could. And just was very fortunate that CCOF was hiring for a policy director at the time. So CCOF stands for California Certified Organic Farmers, and it is one of the original organic certification agencies. So verifying organic practices, helped create the organic standards, and also very heavily involved in education and advocacy. So founded in 1973, 50 years of organic stewardship. After running their policy work for several years, I then took over as CEO in 2019 and had my crash course in crisis management through the pandemic and wildfires and all the things. So I'm still with CCOF, serving as the CEO and working to advance organic agriculture.
Awesome. Love to hear all that. And I think even just how you were thoughtful about trying to see, diverse perspectives in your education and in your goal, right? To focus on small farmers, I think is really cool. Kelly, talk to us about CCOF today. They were critical in, like you mentioned, establishing kind of where organic was started and where it's gone. What are your key focus areas today? You mentioned education, certification. Can you kind of give us a lay of the land of what CCOF does today and your biggest priorities?
Yeah, absolutely. So CCOF has just celebrated our 50-year anniversary. It's really come a long way. It really started as this humble grassroots organization. And what set CCOF and other similar organizations apart is that it was founded by organic farmers. So most people don't realize this, but organic certification really started with farmers certifying each other. They would get together in regional chapters and they would debate what inputs they could use. They'd go and inspect each other's farms, and it was an accountability system. But then eventually there was the need for interstate commerce and growth and processed organic products. And so that's when the movement to create a first state and then a federal organic certification system was born. And again, just a very unique, special thing about organic that farmers went to the government and asked to be regulated. You don't see that often, but they were really needing a way to communicate to their customers, yes, this is truly has integrity and value behind it. So we've come a long way. Today, we certify about 4,500 operations across North America. So that's farmers, handlers, processors, some retailers, even a restaurant or two. So have continued to advance and steward organic certification. And in the certification space, there's been a lot of new regulations coming online over the past year. Constant focus on maintaining integrity throughout the entire supply chain, because that's the backbone of organic. So we've been really full on the organic certification side and implementing these new regulations, as well as supporting add-on certifications. Because what's true today is that your buyers are often looking for not just an organic certification, but you may need food safety certification, or some folks are moving towards an additional regenerative certification. So we've also built out a suite of certification programs so you can get your food safety and your organic certification from us. We won't tell you to take out your hedgerows and not use compost. We'll help you merge those two standards. So really just have expanded our certification work to try to support producers with those needs and provide accessible, valuable services. Advocacy is a huge focus for us. We do California state advocacy a really leading voice in organic specific agriculture policy, as well as support federal advocacy. So things like organic research funding, organic cost share funding, so that's funds to help offset the cost of certification, and all those different programs. Education, we have a foundation, and we gave away over $1 million in grants last year, primarily to producers experiencing hardship, especially our friends in the dairy sector. So our founding members really wanted to create a system to give back to the community and help those in a time of need. So whether that's a wildfire or a depressed market, helping people weather the tough times. We also have funding for future organic farmers, those who are starting out in their careers, as well as folks transitioning to organic. So funding, technical assistance, mentorship, all the different components that it takes to help folks go organic. And I should note that all of these services we also offer in Spanish. We've invested heavily in Spanish services so that we can support a diversity of producers in going organic. And then last but not least, and this is the biggest emerging focus area for us, is promotion. So market development, consumer education, consumer education, making sure consumers continue to understand and trust organic, as well as developing markets for organic producers. When I first started at CCOF, organic demand outpaces supply. We need more organic supply. Now what I hear from producers are, I'm on the verge of selling my organic product into a conventional market because I don't have that demand, because either the retailers are sourcing from states or countries where it's cheaper to do business, or the retailers just hit their capacity for that item. So we're looking at things like institutions, hospitals, and schools, as well as really trying to think about promoting domestic sourcing and production.
Just a little bit going on there, Kelly.
Just a little bit.
Would love to dive into this supply and demand issue, because I think that's a huge reason why adoption has been relatively slow in organic, where these markets aren't super robust for growers to incentivize them to make the move. Like for our farm, just to use as an example, a few years back, we transitioned 100 acres to organic, and Ty and I thought it would be a huge opportunity to differentiate ourselves and move in that direction. And we kind of went all in, let's do this organic and see where it leads. So we went through the transition process, and kind of towards the tail end of the 3-year transition period, started talking to all of our buyers. We grow 10 different crops. So talking to all those buyers of, hey, we grow tomatoes for you. Can we grow this organically? We grow basil for you. Can we grow this organically? And we thought that would be a win, where there would be huge demand from all these buyers. And what ended up happening was those buyers came back and said, we either don't do organic, we don't have demand, where we already have like our organic supply is already tapped, we don't need any more, or there was some agronomic reason why organic was really challenging in our area, being in the Delta where we get cooler nights and moisture. And so there's fungus issues and like not as many organic tools in the toolkit in our specific location. So we got to this process and we're like, oh, did we make the wrong decision? And so as a result, we had to farm organic corn, which is a premium over conventional corn. But in the context of our broader operation, growing peppers and melons and bunch of different crops, it was on the lower end of the value spectrum. So after a year, we ended up making the decision to go back to conventional, which is tough for us because I'm an organic consumer. I think Ty is as well. Like if you look in my fridge and pantry, a majority of the food I buy is organic. So it resonates with me as a consumer. But at the producer level, there was just this disconnect where we wanted to do it, but there wasn't a market for it. So it's just like kind of an unfortunate situation that we're in right now, where there's US growers that I think would like to do organic and the markets just haven't caught up yet.
Well, you all happen to be offering the crops that are in exact competition with Mexico, where production tends to be at a lower cost. And so tomatoes, especially peppers, that's a really tough market to enter into organically right now because there is so much competition.
Totally. We admittedly probably didn't do enough forward-looking planning, right? Like I think we, like Tim mentioned, I think we assumed that, hey, if we build it, they will come type of mentality of, going organic, we can find these markets for them. And we even talk to different food brands directly of like, hey, can we tell a story here of like direct farm to shelf story here of this organic regenerative crop? And the challenge there was twofold. One was volume. We would talk to a baby food brand or something where they're like, okay, what's the volume? This is kind of interesting. And the volume they'd give us would be the equivalent of like 1/10 of an acre. So on 100 acres, that's cool, but is that worth the lift of all the logistics involved? And then the other constraint was just processing, right? There would be lack of processing infrastructure in the supply chain to actually process whatever crop. If it was pumpkins into a puree for a baby food brand, for example, was another constraint. And then just with our traditional customers, buyers, these like processors, again, to Tim's point, they didn't want to risk it from an agronomic perspective. They had concerns like, why are you the only organic farmers in this area trying this? You're the crazy ones. Honestly, it was something that we probably could have avoided, but it was also, I think, the biggest disappointment of that was just like how our dad and our oldest brother viewed organic and even regenerative, because we were making this push of, hey, let's go this direction. There's all these benefits, and they look at it, which they're more conventional, traditional farmers, of this major flop, because we ended up growing crops that were like not the highest and best use of the land. And from a regenerative perspective, we ended up growing corn 3 years in a row, where when we talk about like diversity and crop rotations, we ended up just going back in with corn because it was the only market we could have, and we could manage growing it organically because of some of the constraints with respect to the operation. And so we are not the poster children for organic, but to Tim's point, we are organic consumers ourselves. And so there's just this interesting dynamic that we experience as growers that invested a lot of time and resources into it. I'm just curious, what your thoughts are for other growers that are maybe considering and looking at, how do I farm better? How do I farm more sustainably? And they're looking at regenerative and organic. And there's this, I think, ongoing conversation of regenerative or organic, or do they fit together? Like, how do you think about talking to other growers that are considering making the jump and are concerned about some of these, I think, agronomic risks and market risks?
Yeah, absolutely. And your story is the perfect case study in the challenges of transitioning to organic. It takes 3 years to move a piece of land into organic certification. That is a long time. The market really changes. So even if there was demand at the beginning of 3 years, will it be there at the end? Or are you going to experience some kind of natural disaster, flooding during those 3 years? And so there's a lot at risk during those 3 years. Our theory of transition does include just some basic funding to help weather those 3 years, because you're making all these changes, but you don't get that premium during those 3 years. So how do you make it through financially? It also includes technical assistance. It's very true in organic, we have not had the same level we don't have this traditional agricultural support. So extension agents. There are now a few organic extension agents in California, but still working to invest in those traditional resources that other farmers have, training agricultural professionals, agronomists, on how organic systems work. And there's a lot of exciting movement, and I think the current commitment from the UC system to invest in organic systems is inspiring and encouraging. So technical assistance has to be a key piece of this. Mentorship, so learning from other growers who've done it, and especially if you're the only one in your area, so you don't have somebody to bounce off, hey, are you dealing with this pest from our unique climate conditions? We see this in the Southeast a lot, where organic farmers can be really isolated, so they just don't have that same community network. But last but not least, and I think this is the most important piece when we talk about transitioning folks towards organic, is market readiness. So when we're giving a grant to somebody to help them transition to organic, we're asking the tough questions of, what's your market like? Do you have a buyer contract ready at the end of the 3 years? Do you have data showing that demand has been consistent or that there's an unmet need? Maybe you're growing something unique like a turmeric, or if you're maybe a Midwest grain grower, there's demand. So that market readiness piece has to be a part of the equation in today's market. So it takes a little bit of all. And that infrastructure piece of having a processing facility ready to go cannot be underestimated. It's a total supply chain movement that needs to happen. We see that a lot in livestock. You can raise your cattle, your pig completely organically, but then you don't have an organic certified slaughterhouse, you're selling into a conventional market. So it is complex, but I would say for the first time, we are starting to see a number of strategic programs coming on at both the state and federal levels to address these complexities in a holistic way. We're seeing the USDA, we're seeing California's Department of Agriculture, we're seeing agencies like NRCS, extension agents, starting to learn and build out education and infrastructure and resources, funding to build out organic processing facilities. So we have a long way to go, but for the first time, I'm feeling optimistic that there are programs coming online to address these. Organics has always been really scrappy. We always that's why CCOF does so much, because we're trying to fill in these different gaps. And I think the industry is maturing and getting more strategic about we need mainstream solutions to some of these complex problems.
Kelly, we've mentioned regenerative a few times in the conversation, but want to dig in here a little bit and get your thoughts on kind of where you see regenerative fitting in within the organic ecosystem. There's the regenerative organic certification, which is basically a combination of the two. You can correct me if I'm wrong. And there's specific regenerative certifications like Regenified and Land to Market. Then there's organic. And I think within both these systems, they're both have alignment, but there's also areas where they deviate. Tillage, for example, is a no-no in regenerative, but in a lot of organic systems, without the ability to use herbicides, tillage, and that kind of stuff is more common. So maybe just kind of speak to how you see both these systems and where they deviate or come together.
Regenerative is the word on everyone's mind. And what does it mean for organic? And I really think of organic as the roots of regenerative. I mean, a lot of the practices we're talking about when we're talking about regenerative, cover cropping, crop rotation, I mean, those are coming from organic stewardship, which of course is coming from indigenous practices that predate the modern organic movement. And a lot of the research and development for those practices came from organic advocates pushing and fighting for those resources and those practices and developing. So I think it's really exciting to see more of a mainstream adoption and starting to see folks in Midwest grain circles talking about soil health and nitrogen budgeting. Like, that is a really exciting to see these practices starting to spread and take hold. I think the one practice, where there's some distinction is this no-till. And what is no-till? Does that mean you're never tilling or you're tilling sometimes? And there's a couple of challenges. No-till is not a viable practice for specialty crops. So when we're here in the West Coast talking about production, no-till is not going to be, it's just not going to be a viable practice. There's also plenty of science showing that no-till and included in a system that's using a holistic approach can absolutely support soil health. Tillage is not evil. Tillage can be a completely fine and acceptable part of a regenerative and organic system. So I think sometimes I'll go to farm conferences, more conventional farm conferences, and they'll say, well, organic's hurting the soil because they're tilling. And that hurts my heart because soil health is the complete foundation of organic. And if you're destroying the soil, then you're not actually farming organically. So I hope that there can be more coming together on these points and less trying to make these arbitrary distinctions, and recognizing, depending on what you're farming and where you're farming it, there may be some distinctions in your practices. And that's really how the organic certification was set up, is so that you can adjust to your site-specific conditions, but there's basic guardrails around biodiversity, soil health, and what inputs you're using. We offer regenerative organic certification. I think for some of our members, being able to add a certification on top of organic is really signaling. So there's a few things. So organic is an incredible baseline. The greatest strength of organic, what is unmatched about organic certification, is federal enforcement. The level of scrutiny and oversight and the consequences for violating organic standards, I mean, you could literally go to jail. It's just unmatched in any other food label. So that's a really high level of integrity for the consumer. The greatest challenge of organic certification is federal enforcement. New rules take a long time to implement, and producers have federal due process rights. So some people don't always see what's happening behind the scenes when it comes to organic enforcement. So that means if there's an issue on the field, usually if it's correctable, they'll be given a chance to correct it. And it's kind of a multi-step process when an issue's at play. So something like a private standard on top of organic, which creates a nice baseline, sort of can create the opportunity to go bolder and even faster. So if you want to, for example, add a living wage requirement and you want to communicate to your customers, I am taking care of my workforce. Your produce was grown by workers who have health benefits and a living wage and are not exposed to toxic inputs every day. You want a certification like a regenerative organic certification because labor is not included in baseline organic. So that's where an add-on certification can really help distinguish and help folks communicate with their buyers and distinguish themselves in the marketplace. And regenerative organic is not the only certification that offers that, but it's certainly a strong one. I think the regenerative standards also tend to be more outcome-based, so more testing, which I think is a valuable consideration, especially as we're trying to address specific climate change issues. So again, if you're looking for more outcome-based certification, then a regenerative standard may be great. For us, organic has to be the baseline. Otherwise, what are we really communicating to the consumer? I think I hear both ends. I hear organic's too hard, so we need regenerative to not be tied to organic because it's too hard to go organic. And then I hear on the other hand, well, organic's not hard enough. It doesn't go far enough. So we need regenerative because organic's not enough. And I kind of love that those both ends happen because I think that means that, well, organic's probably good because it's right there in the middle. It's some kind of compromise. So it's complex. I really hear the Midwest farmers, especially, who are saying, we don't have the science, we don't have the infrastructure to go organic, but we still want to be able to make a claim that reflects that we're growing differently. And I really hear that and I respect that effort. But I also know how hard fought it was to create a baseline organic definition. I know how difficult it is to maintain integrity around the use of the word organic. And we've come so far and have so far yet to go that it makes me nervous to explore regenerative without organic as a baseline because it is such a solid foundation.
I totally agree with a lot of what you shared, and specifically around, the beginnings of the organic movement were really like soil health nerds, right? Around focusing on that. And I think I agree with you that a lot of people don't know that organic had deep, deep roots in just true emphasis on the soil. I want to like dig in a little deeper on just this whole conversation around, organic, regenerative, et cetera. Like our view on it is, as farmers that have unsuccessfully done organic, have kind of successfully done some regenerative practices that aren't, to your point, aren't certified. It's something we can't really make claims other than pointing to specific practices we've done. We've looked into that. But Our view is that farmers should make the right decision for their context. And if in your context you have an organic market and you have the environmental and agronomic situation where you can make organic work for you profitably and have that market, like absolutely, that's awesome. And if you're a farmer that wants to do no-till and has that, and you have certain environments, like our view is that farmers shouldn't necessarily be forced into one area or the other, or mandated that they should do one or the other. We believe really like the market should determine, like if a grower can no longer get a return on a crop that's conventionally grown as sustainably as possible versus just spraying for spraying's sake, which I don't think any farmer does. I think it should be a tool in the toolkit. And like, do you feel the same way? Do you think that every farmer should be organic?
I was about to say absolutely until your final question, should every farmer be organic? I mean, I think our CCOF's vision is a world where organic is the norm, where organic is just so embedded in how we're growing food, you don't even need certification. It's just how everybody's growing. People are paying attention to soil health. They're removing toxic synthetic inputs from production systems. So, absolutely, we envision everybody having the opportunity to go organic, but absolutely, you can't force somebody to go organic. And I am not a believer in shame-based movements where you're trying to call out somebody because, they're using a conventional pesticide. There may be a reason. And we don't know all the circumstances of how they're using it. Maybe they're using it with integrity. So I really think what I love about organic and what drew me to the organic space is that it is a voluntary opt-in system to communicate the work you're doing. And, especially as somebody who studied environmental law, which is very focused on forcing people to do one thing or another, what I love about organic is it allows producers to experiment, to do better, and then have a way to communicate that to the consumer. And I'm also a pragmatist, and I understand that there are real serious barriers and challenges to going organic. And that's what we need to focus on and address, not forcing people to be one thing or another.
Kelly, as we start to wrap up here, just want to talk about kind of like outlook for organic. I think the baseline of acreage of U.S. organic farmland acres is around 1%. You can probably correct that stat. I see mixed reports, but relatively low in the U.S. The state of California put out this nature-based climate solutions target for organic, and in 2030 they're targeting 10% up to 20% in 2045. Like, how do we close this gap? If we are at 1-2%, like how do we 5x or 10x the amount of organic farms in the next 6 years within California?
Yeah, absolutely. So yes, I do believe nationally it's about 1%. And I think in California we're getting close to 10%. So I think their goals are modest. For us, it's really market development. If the success of organic was driven by the consumer, it wasn't driven because the USDA went full force behind us. It wasn't driven because we had tons of funding and regulatory support and technical assistance. It was driven because consumers wanted organic. And so people were able to step up and have the kind of economic return to invest in organic systems. And so if we want to grow organic, give more folks the opportunity to grow, buy, and sell organic, it really has to be about creating a strong market. So that means prioritizing our domestic producers. I think it's really frustrating and hard that the focus on local and regional sourcing it seemed to, do you hear local sourcing talked about in the larger buyer community these days? Because it seems to be a real lost focus. And I think I think it's great to have year-round tomato production. It's really exciting to see the growth of organic in Mexico. But if you're a retailer importing organic tomatoes from Mexico in the height of California's growing season, why? And so I think buyers and retailers really need to get on board and think about why are you selling organic? And what is your true commitment? And if it's to transform our food system and address climate change and have healthier water and safer working conditions for our farm workers, then you need to be supporting domestic producers. And I would say the same for California, because California is notorious for upping our regulations at every turn. And I'm really proud of the type of labor and water regulations we have. But you got to put your money where your mouth is. Because then if you're going to go source for our schools produce grown in other countries and other states, then you're moving the problem to another region. So I think for us, it's all about getting very clear and very focused on educating our buyers and putting pressure. Let's source from domestic producers, put our money where our mouth is, and start to address these obstacles, because we all know farmers have every obstacle under the sun facing them.
Really well put. I completely agree with you. And it almost makes me sick to my stomach when there's locally grown produce available in the state, and buyers are sourcing globally. I mean, just to dig in a little bit more there, like how do we go about addressing this? Like, I think that there's this like dynamic with organic where there's been a huge uptick of production internationally with lower cost of production, like you mentioned, and frankly, like more opportunity for fraud, right, within the organic system internationally. Like, how do we go about, you talk about educating buyers when their mandates are to get the lowest cost for the consumer. Like, there's this misalignment of incentives, and they're just looking for the produce with the organic label on it to fulfill their volume number, and they don't necessarily care that, hey, maybe they're cutting corners in a different country or in Mexico. And I'm not insinuating that every international organic farmer is doing that, right? But I'm just the point of, you have this local production that has more stringent requirements and enforcement by our government, like you mentioned. Like, how do we do that when they're just when it's a race to the bottom?
Yeah, and people think, oh, organic's more expensive, there's this premium. Well, I mean, is it a premium or is it true cost of growing organically? And by the way, if there is a premium, is it really going back to the farmer or the retailer? Because the farmer's profit margin is getting smaller and smaller every year, but we're asking for more and more compliance. And I mean, I think at the end of the day, where I see the food system heading is that consumers are increasingly values driven. Consumers are looking for products that align with their values. And I think that organic is a great option for those consumers. And if you're selling organically in the US, you're meeting some kind of baseline standard wherever it's coming from. How to educate buyers on the need to prioritize domestic production, I'm not sure. I mean, there's just been massive consolidation in the buying space. And so companies and retailers that used to have regional buyers and a real commitment to being embedded in the regional community, it's just not very common anymore. So I don't know if there's some way to reconnect. I mean, I think sometimes buyers need more tools. We have a directory so you can source and look for organic producers in certain regions. And we'd love to see tools like that be used more by buyers. I don't know. I think at the end of the day, the companies are going to have to make the commitment. And they're coming out with sustainability goals and regenerative goals. So if you're coming out with these goals, I would love to see more full supply chain analysis of their sourcing practices. So I don't have the answer, but I think for us, we kind of go back to our roots and we're going directly to the shopper. We're going directly to the parent that's making the choice at the store, and just doing our best to step it up and really communicate the value of organic and regenerative practices in general, because that's what we're here to achieve, not to have one system be better than the other, but to truly promote environmental stewardship and healthier food system.
Kelly, this conversation has been a ton of fun. Really enjoyed chatting with you. As we wrap things up, how can our listeners get in touch and connect with you and CCOF?
CCOF.org is our website. We just relaunched it. Tons of resources. You can learn all about certification, get involved with our advocacy, and our education efforts. We're also on social media. You can find those through our website, ccof.org, and we'd love to stay connected.
So, Tim, what'd you think?
I think it was a fun subject to dig into. Like, there's a lot of opinions around this, and so it was interesting just to kind of like hear about some of the challenges and where CCOF sees the organic movement going. I think organic as well as conventional has struggled with trade, where there's cheaper imports available, and like that's been a huge detriment to, I think, locally produced organic products. Like that was one of the challenges on our farm, where we grow a diverse mix of crops, but those crops can be produced organically in Mexico for quite a bit cheaper, and that's true of conventional as well. So I think they're both subject to kind of the food system at large, and that creates some challenging getting higher profitability for local growers.
No, I think that's right. I mean, I think the more I've been in the space, the more I'm really pro local, right? I think local over everything. You can be organic, that's great. You can be regenerative, that's great. But local is providing, the source of your food coming from somewhere near you, from by a farmer that you hopefully know that farms it in the best way possible, whether that's organic or otherwise. And so I totally agree with you. I hope you guys enjoyed just hearing a different perspective on organic. Tim and I both did as well. We learned some stuff. We agreed with some stuff. We didn't agree with some other stuff. So that's the point of conversation, and why podcasts are a great platform for doing that. Appreciate you listening. If you haven't already subscribed to the podcast, make sure you've hit that subscribe button. We'll be back next week with a new episode that you won't want to miss.